Since Skyrim's release in 2011, players have debated their favorite city in the game due to their varying qualities of content, characters, scenery, and lore. Some cities have little going for them, while others are rife with entertaining dialogue and quests. Other factors will influence ranking, such as a city's layout or a hold's general atmosphere. Given how intertwined some cities are with their holds, I figured it most fair to rank cities and holds together to see how they hold up against one another. I think it goes without saying that this list is subjective opinion, and as such, you're equally entitled to yours. I hope you learned something new about the series while watching the video, and if you don't, I encourage you to leave a comment with either your favorite city or your favorite lore tidbit within the game. In the vast marshes of Hjaalmarch lies the village town of Morthal, home to a recently burned down abode which brought death to the mother and daughter residing inside. The townsfolk expressed distrust for the court wizard upon the player's entry, with accusations of the blaze being directed at Fallion, the court wizard. This ties to the best, and one of few quests that Morthal offers, laid to rest. Seemingly the most interesting thing about Morthal is the local vampire issue, which manifests itself by means of the blaze of the house. By uncovering the mystery, you learn more about the townsfolk within, and the quest itself proves pretty enjoyable. The girl's father, Rogar, has found a new lover, Alva, rather quickly after the loss of his wife and daughter, which makes the townsfolk rather suspicious of him. Additionally, in Morthal, we can find the hilt of Mehrunes' razor in the home of the tired and simple Jorgen, who runs the local mill and is pleased to be rid of it. Citizens themselves admit to being fairly bored, and I can see why. The city layout is pretty meh. Most of the shops are spread throughout a couple of alleys, and some lie upon the docks on the water itself. I sadly often find myself turned around pretty easily, but then again, I rarely visit due to how little of interest there truly is in Morthal. One of few things of interest within the hold is the Labyrinthian, but even that's discovered through the College of Winterhold, which hardly counts. The city is fairly detached from the Sea of Ghosts, and it seems only small watercrafts can access through the marshes, thus cutting off any major water trade. According to the innkeeper, her front door doesn't get much use, and the shopkeepers claim to rarely have any business at all. Generally in Hjaalmarch, it's snowy, overcast, or it's a little bit sunny, with the terrain offering the same gray that you'd be seeing otherwise. It's marshy, with little canals and island pockets sprinkled throughout the shallow waters. As a result, it is an absolute horror to try and fast travel from this hold. Slaughterfish and mud crabs are abundant, and a single one just out of eyeshot can be the difference between using weight or fast travel mechanics. However, if you're in for chitin or scales, this is your spot. In fact, it may be a fisherman's dream, as the Hearthfire House, Windstad Manor, has one standalone feature, the fish hatchery. Overall, Hjaalmarch as a hold and Morthal as a city are both fairly boring and really are not the best for sightseeing or even gameplay. As a result, Morthal stands out as the worst city in Skyrim, and Hjaalmarch as the worst hold. Winterhold is a must-see for all magic users, with the entire Mages faction being held at the college and the Shrine of Azura visible amidst the misty mountains nearby. Sadly, Winterhold as a city offers little outside of the college, with few townfolk to even speak of. Local drunk Renmir claims, "It's not like there's anything to do here but drink anyways," and his sister, the shopkeep Berna, woefully pawns what little merchandise comes through town. Nellakar at the Frozen Hearth is a former college member, and assists the player in claiming Azura's star, a must-find for any enchanter in the game, and Jarl Korrir is passionately driven to restore Winterhold to its former glory. See, once a prominent city of Skyrim, Winterhold's college is rumored to have caused a recent catastrophe wherein most of the city was swallowed by the Sea of Ghosts, an event soon to be called the Great Collapse. As a result, only 5 buildings remain in Winterhold: the Jarl's Longhouse, Berna's shop, the inn, and the home of proud Whiterun citizen Kraldar, who, like the Jarl, believes that Winterhold will one day be great again. Since the Great Collapse, the college is viewed in a rather unpleasant light, with many in Skyrim believing the college to be the source of the catastrophe. With most of the town being destroyed, little of interest remains outside of the college itself. Again, it's a mage's dream, sort of, with different halls of study for general practice, halls for adept mages and master wizards, the Arcanium ran by Urag Groshub, the quarters for the Archmage Savosarin, and the mysterious Midden, caverns and ruins sprawling beneath the caves under the college. The questline itself is only decent, and Skyrim as a game doesn't give magic the power that it had in previous Elder Scrolls games, making it a bit of a flop for a mage build. Additionally, only half of the college questline truly takes place at the college, with the Midden standing out as one of its more noteworthy locales. Winterhold as a whole is, like its city counterpart, fairly weak. Outside of Azura's shrine, there's the outpost of Septimus Cygnus on the frozen tundra of the Sea of Ghosts, wherein you can obtain the Augma Infinium, and you can also witness the sad story of Frostflow Lighthouse. Winterhold is a city that is lore-driven, which sadly makes its in-game appearance suffer pretty hard. The college is again a mage's dream, which helps make up for the city, but due to Skyrim's nature of being less magic-oriented makes the bulk of the content in Winterhold suffer. Aside from the College, Septimus, and the Azura Shrine, Winterhold has little to offer, earning it the number 2 spot as the worst city in Skyrim. Falkreath is a city known for its cemetery, which, due to its border with the Imperial province of Cyrodiil, has seen many battles due to the border disputes. Just north of Imperial Bruma and at the northern foothills of the Hjaalmarch Mountains, Falkreath seemingly has little trade that comes through, and apart from its cemetery, has little noteworthy within the city itself. It's another of Skyrim's village-like cities, akin to Dawnstar, Morthal, and Winterhold. Unlike Morthal, Falkreath is seemingly easier to navigate, but is still not as forward as it might be within Dawnstar. Falkreath proves to be a bit less interesting as a city, with its lore being a bit more intriguing than its citizens, but Falkreath as a whole has a grand amount of interesting content. For one, it has 2 Daedric quests. The former is more or less a dungeon crawl fetch quest with a talking dog, but the latter presents cases of moral manipulation and wraps up beneath the sky of a haunting blood-red moon. Very interesting for Skyrim. Both quests, like some other Daedric quests, give you the option of one of 2 artifacts. The Hold also sports other lore-heavy locations, like Bleak Falls Barrow, Helgen, and the Twilight Sepulchre. The forest is gorgeous, rife with tales big and small, and many different intriguing locations to stumble upon, such as Pine Watch. At first glance, it's a simple cabin in the woods with a basement, but is much more than meets the eye. Adjacent to Pine Watch is Lakeview Manor, the player-buildable house from the Hearthfire DLC, which ironically is not the house with the fish hatchery. Many reference Lakeview as the most scenic of the Hearthfire land plots, but just that the property itself is cursed, given that giants, wolves, and bandits alike commonly spawn around or occasionally underneath the house itself. Likely the most noteworthy stop in the woods of Falkreath is close by to the city itself. Sheltered underneath the trees in the rocky hills lies a door, black as night and aglow with a deep crimson red. Behold the black door to the Dark Brotherhood's sanctuary, home to a family of assassins. Entry to the sanctuary is only granted to those who have friends like these. Bordering the Hjaalmarch Mountains and sitting afoot the throat of the world, Falkreath's forestry is shared by rocky, snow-covered bluffs adjacent to the rift, though I find the forests, rivers, and lakes much more appealing and more player-friendly. Between its lore content, the scenery, the quests, and the Dark Brotherhood, Falkreath is a dream for any adventurous player who desires sightseeing and discovery. Dawnstar doesn't seem like much at first glance. An underused port connected to the Sea of Ghosts, 2 mines on opposite ends of town, and a little to see aside from the lonely lighthouse on the coast and Nightcaller Temple resting atop the local mountain peak. On the note of this temple, the townsfolk all seem to share a common theme: nightmares. Daedric activity is rife in Dawnstar, with the nightmares being sourced from said temple, courtesy of the Daedric Prince of Nightmares, Vermina. You'll find a priest of Mara, Arender, with knowledge of this at the town's local inn. The museum close by is headed by Silas Vesius, and boasts a rich amount of lore from Oblivion pertaining to Mehrunes Dagon, and even sports relics from the previous game such as mythic dawn robes, Bankar Cameron's commentaries on the Mysterium Xarxes, and a burn page of the Xarxes itself, used by Martin Septim in the 4th game to open a portal to Cameron's paradise. Featured among these items is even the scabbard of Mehrunes' razor, of which Silas requests that you assemble the scattered pieces of. Other noteworthy citizens include Ironbreaker mine owner Batild, who we meet later on a Dark Brotherhood contract. We meet her main opposition, Lagelf, who runs the Quicksilver mine on the opposite end of town, and the less than busy crew of the lone ship and her captain, the star-charting Wayfinder. The city itself has a decent layout, with an inlet featuring Wayfinder's boat in the center and 2 tiers of buildings surrounding it. As mentioned earlier, the 2 mines are spread across opposite ends of town. The inn is at the fast travel spot, and the shops are sprinkled throughout the city. It's almost impossible to get lost in Dawnstar. You'd be embarrassed to say that you get turned around here. The atmosphere is that of a tender winter, with a vast snowy tundra spanning across the Pale, and Hjaalmarch Hall bordering the plains of Whiterun, which, for its central location and potential views, make it my favorite viable plot in the game. Snowy peaks crop up among the outlying terrain, with sinister locations appearing like the Shrine of Mehrunes Dagon for Silas's quest, Nightcaller Temple housing the Skull of Corruption, and the not-so-conspicuously placed Black Door of the Dark Brotherhood at the north side of Dawnstar. There are a few other quest-related locations like Vollenrud and the Tower of Mazark, but the Pale as a whole proves to get old rather quickly. However, for the lore, the content, and the atmosphere it has, Dawnstar holds its own among the villagey towns, and in my opinion is the best of Skyrim's 4 village-like cities. Windhelm is a complicated city. It presents a lot of unique scenarios, but it also misses the mark on a few of them. For one, the Palace of Kings, for what it is a bit of a letdown. It's not nearly as interesting as Castle Dower or the Blue Palace, yet this is the base of the rebellion, home to the player-dependent, soon-to-be High King of Skyrim, Jarl Ulfric Stormcloak. Yet even Dragon's Reach is far more entertaining to explore. On another hand, Windhelm as a city handles one thing insanely well: politics. This extends to the issues within the city itself, the province, and the nations at large. Jarl Ulfric Stormcloak and his right-hand man, Hjaalmarch Stonefist, often discuss tactics and try to predict how other Jarls will react to their military movements. Hjaalmar's brother Rolf, on the other hand, is the prime example of another political issue within Windhelm: racism. For context, between the 4th and 5th Elder Scrolls games, the nation of Morrowind suffered an extreme natural disaster and an international invasion almost simultaneously. Morrowind is a complicated nation, with actions like contract assassinations and even slavery being considered legal, including the slavery of Argonians. Blackmarsh and Morrowind have a complicated history as well, with the Hiss-led Argonians and allegiance-divided Morrowind waging wars against one another through the ages. The Red Mountain, the massive volcano at the center of Morrowind, happens to have its second eruption in Elder Scrolls history, and the Anzalil, recently unified in their victories against the Oblivion Crisis, used the opportunity to stage an insurgency within Morrowind. Though House Riverwood ultimately halts the invasion, many displaced Dunmer found themselves seeking refuge nearby, and in the neighboring city of Windhelm. The Nords of Windhelm have varying views on the refugees, some making snide remarks referring to the Dunmer as greyskins, and sadly as such, they nickname the district housing many of the Dark Elves as the Grey Quarter. This is a sad but true parallel to the real world that we live in, with views on Windhelm as a safe haven varying between different residents of the city. Windhelm is also being plagued by a series of grisly murders in the dark alleys of the city. Young women are being slaughtered in the dead of night, but the ongoing civil war makes bearing guard to investigate pretty tough. As such, it's up to you as the player to figure it out. Though one of the weakest of the major cities, Windhelm sports one of Skyrim's best quests: Blood on the Ice. Using clues from the scene, properties in the city, and rumors about its citizens, seek to narrow down who the murderer is in Windhelm, like a Bones case using necromancers. It proves pretty tricky too, with subterfuge and second guessing keeping you wondering about what the outcome will truly be. Even once you think you've resolved the case and caught the killer, you may want to think again about who you sent to jail. However, the darkness doesn't stop there. A local boy, Aventus Arantino, is rumored to be performing dark rites in order to contact the Dark Brotherhood. His ask is that the cruel headmistress of Skyrim's orphanage be given a break, permanently, from living. Do or don't, you can ultimately decide the fate of the Dark Brotherhood if you play your cards right, even going as far as to bring them down entirely. Another choice presented to the player is whether or not to join the Stormcloaks in Skyrim's independence. Skyrim's former king, Torrig, held allegiance to the Empire after the Thalmor's enforcement of the White Gold Concordat, which, in addition to other statutes, outlawed the worship of Talos, or Tiber Septim, who founded the Empire, unifying all provinces under the Septim dynasty. Ulfric, who supported the free worship of Talos, saw the signing of the Concordat as a sign of weakness and cowardice to the Thalmor from the Empire, and in accordance with Nordic tradition, challenged the High King in combat for the rule of Skyrim. The nation is divided between the preservation of tradition and independence, versus a political and possible physical war with the Thalmor. However, during the Civil War questline, the politics of the war are rarely discussed, and oftentimes you're simply dispatched to take over the forts that are controlled by the Empire. However, there are still two very noteworthy sieges, the first taking place at Whiterun and the second at Solitude, which houses Imperial military command within Skyrim. The Civil War questline is not much to go on for story or lore. Bethesda seemed to leave more of that in the world building at large. As for the hold itself, Eastmarch is a diverse landscape, but is mainly snow-capped bluffs and mountains. Further east of the city, amidst the mountains bordering Morrowind, is the Skellim of Boethia. This is the only shrine with a significant name, and it definitely earns it. The bulk of the quest is little more than a sneak-themed dungeon clear, but the setup for the quest at the Skellim itself is beyond cool. The occult spar with one another continuously, and as you ascend the stairs to the flame under Boethia, you see a spiral coming together at the base of a sacrificial pole. Only by sacrificing a follower held captive at the pole will Boethia answer your call. This location is very cool, but does little to make up for Eastmarch's lacking interesting locations. Windhelm itself is fairly dark as a city in its quest themes, but glum in its presentation. Citizens are uneasy, agitated, or simply unpleasant. The city layout is an absolute nightmare, and after 12 years of Skyrim, I still get lost in the alleys of Windhelm. Though its lore is worth dissecting, the city itself is one of my least favorite to visit, even in comparison to some of the village cities within Skyrim. As such, Windhelm is the worst of the major cities within Skyrim. The cliffs of the Reach are home to many different Forsworn camps, caves nestled in the bluffs, streams and rivers, and ruins both Nordic and Dwemer alike. If you've seen Dwemer ruins before, you'll quickly piece together upon entry to the city that Markarth is a Dwemer city that was reclaimed by the Nords. The city itself can be odd to navigate for early players, but after getting the layout down, it gets significantly easier to get around. Markarth sprawls across many different tiers, with a spire peak featuring Dibella's temple at the top, mines within and outside of the city walls, streams running throughout the city, and the Understone Keep, home to the Jarl and his constituents, housing many different secrets for the player to find. During a quest for the Thieves Guild, you get to see much of the keep in Calcelmo's Dwemer Museum, and if you find yourself up for it and not too afraid of spiders, exterminate the spider Nimmy from within the dark halls of the keep. Upon entry to Markarth, you'll quickly find it's not quite as shiny as it may appear. The first thing the player witnesses in the city is the murder of a citizen, and the killer yelling out that the Reach belongs to the Forsworn. Citizens are assured by the guards that the Forsworn have no presence in Markarth, but a man named Eltrys slips you a note that may imply otherwise. Due to your anonymity within the city, Eltrys believes you to be perfect to investigate the recent string of murders by the Forsworn, and find out why the guards are keeping it quiet. This turns out to be one of Skyrim's most standout quests. Like Blood on the Ice from Windhelm, the Forsworn conspiracy is very story-driven, getting familiar with different parts of the city, including the rich and shady Silverblood clan, to find out what secrets are housed within the walls of Markarth. However, amidst the city's dark secrets is something far more sinister, an abandoned house near the city center. What starts as rumors of Daedra worship turns into the end of paranormal activity, as you find yourself trapped within the haunted house, home to one of the most notorious Daedra known to Mer or man. Numera also finds her shrine within the walls of the city, and like Boethia, has her own iconic shrine, and Pereite resides within the hills of the Reach. Though navigating these hills and the cliffs can be troublesome at times, it's easiest when you just stick to the road. If the terrain doesn't end up proving all that difficult for you, you'll most certainly find challenge at the hand of the Forsworn. This clan of wild folk, self-dubbed the True Sons and Daughters of the Reach, once shared the city of Markarth with the Nords after their arrival from Admora. Though it was a rocky relationship, and the Forsworn once staged a coup of the city amidst the chaos of the Great War, they captured the city only for a time, until they were forced out by the Nords who reclaimed Markarth, and the Reachmen fled to the hills. They proved cumbersome in numbers, especially when paired with the wildlife such as the local bears, saber-cats, or wolves. A notable Forsworn outpost is that of Karthspire, home to the cliffside entrance to Skyhaven Temple. If you don't recall what this is, you visit here during the main quest to find Alduin's Wall. The Reach itself isn't the most stunning of holds, but still presents outstanding design from the developers in select locations, featuring vast leaps and waterfalls, hidden storytelling, and even allusions to real-life fairy tales such as the Three Billy Goats Gruff, and additionally plenty of locations to explore. Given the complexity of the city's politics, economy fueled by the Silverbloods, the scenic design, and enjoyable quests, the Reach proves to be a wonderful hold, and Markarth proves to be a standout city. Whoever thought of using a Dwemer city as a Nordic settlement deserves a raise. It's wonderful to get to enjoy the Dwarven culture without having to constantly slug your way through Automata and Falmer to see it. I would love to see more design like this for cities in the future of Elder Scrolls. Solitude is the base of imperial power in Skyrim, with General Tullius headquartered in Castle Dower. Cousin of the Emperor Victoria Vici hosts her wedding within the city, and Skyrim's busiest port houses none other than the East Empire Company. And even the Thalmor, who maintain a rocky relationship with the Empire, set up their Skyrim embassy in the mountains nearby. The city itself is quite scenic, and shares resemblance with the classic fantasy styles of Cyrodiil, featuring stone brick castle walls, towers, and a bridge to a large palace with hidden secrets between its walls. In addition to generals, cousins, and companies, the Emperor's boat itself, the Kataraya, makes an appearance beneath the bridge to the Blue Palace, with the man himself aboard. If you find yourself wishing to own a piece of the scenic city, you can purchase the largest in-city house in Skyrim, Proudspire Manor, within the walls of Solitude. The city is also home to a number of interesting quests, such as Lights Out, The Mind of Madness, the Wolf Queen plot, and to the northwest, the ominous castle Volkahar houses the clan of vampire lords, should you wish to join them in their quest for power. Haafingar as a hold is a bit small compared to the other holds, but sports styles of a few others, sharing the border of the marshy Hjaalmarch to the southeast, the Sea of Ghosts and the Karth River to the north, forests to the south, and mountains to the northwest. There are a multitude of different sights to see, but rarely do I visit Haafingar aside from business and solitude. The characters within the city are not quite as significant as you might expect them to be. The Emperor, his cousin, and General Tullius are all quite important characters, but most, especially Tullius, don't seem to be used to their full potential. As the base of imperial power in the province, Solitude is not as politically driven as you might expect it to be, with the exception being the execution of gatekeeper Rogvir, See, after High King Torg was slain by Ulfric Stormcloak, Rogvir allowed Ulfric to escape the city due to his belief in Nordic tradition shared with Ulfric. This is a topic that correlates directly to the Nord struggle for independence and the Empire's struggle to maintain status quo with the Thalmor. On the note of Tullius and the Civil War, it's about the same questline as would be the Stormcloak side, but instead of sieging Whiterun, you defend it, and you raid Windhelm at the end of the questline, not Solitude. The right and wrong of both sides is a whole different topic of discussion that we'll save for a later time. The city itself is pretty big, which is a bit of a drawback, and you can't get around very efficiently, but this is compensated by its pleasant layout. Plenty of shops are available upon entrance, and it's nearly impossible to get lost. Again, I rarely find myself in the hold here aside from visiting the big city itself, which has a surprising lack of lore-related material and interesting characters given its setting, but otherwise is dense with fun quests and scenes to discover. Skyrim's perfect introduction, and Bethesda's perfect showcase of the new age. The flat terrain of the Hold of Whiterun helps show off places far in the distance and showcase the density of various locations, but sadly doesn't bode well for rendering grass or the few trees that appear in the Hold. The landscape is colorful, vibrant, and lush, with plenty of interesting locations to discover. It's the perfect introduction to what the rest of the map has to offer, and what the game is going to show you. The more you explore, the more you find. There are tidbits of lore, small bits of storytelling, and you can see many key story locations from this area. Dragon's Reach, High Hrothgar, the Western Watchtower, Bleak Falls Barrow, the list goes on. The wildlife is rife with do's and don'ts, like wolves along the roads, mudcrabs by the river, bandits at the camps, but you might learn quickly to steer clear of saber cats, mammoths, and the mammoth-herding giants. As a result, the Hold serves as a wonderful tutorial for the player of the do's and don'ts of the game. You may want to stick with some weaker enemies and hold off on fighting the giants until you're a higher level. Along the road by Whiterun, you may discover a silly jester with a broken wagon and a big box, a meadery with a rat problem, and maybe even a companion or two, who aid you in fighting a local giant. This moment here serves as an introduction to two things: companions and the companions. Giants on your own can be a very tough fight, but Skyrim makes use of a follower mechanic, where allies will follow you on adventures, carry your things, and help you in tough fights, such as this encounter with the giant outside Whiterun. This little crew may taunt or admire your prowess, and tell you of an overturned boat turned mead hall within the walls of the city, the headquarters of the companions, and, if you join, you can have your shield brother or shield sister bolster your ability to survive while still low level. This is usually the faction that I knock out first, less for the need of followers and more to establish my level platform, and frankly, just to get the story out of the way. See, the Companions is a fan-divided faction due to it doing lore very well, but its story incredibly poorly. The aforementioned overturned boat is a home they call Hjaalmarch, frankly one of the cooler places within Whiterun. Before mankind settled on Tamriel, the continent wherein Elder Scrolls takes place, they traveled in a small party from Etmora, helmed by Nord legend Ysgramor. After settling in the first man-made Tamrielic settlement of Sarthal, the Etmorans were slaughtered by the elves with few survivors, an event that would soon become known as the Night of Tears. One survivor, Ysgramor, fled to Etmora and returned to Skyrim aboard Hjaalmarch with 500 companions, wherein they unleashed their vengeance on the elves and claimed Skyrim as their own. After the discovery of the mysterious Skyforge, Whiterun became a new home to the companions. The faction in-game revolves around this bit of Elder Scrolls history, but is more focused on werewolves. Werewolves? Don't mistake my tone. Werewolves are fun, especially in Elder Scrolls. They've been around since Morrowind. But the companions and werewolf story doesn't mesh incredibly well, especially with the faceless bandit faction of the Silverhand as your primary foes. Nonetheless, The Companions is a senselessly fun series of fetch and fight quests that give you a neat ability to maul and feast upon your foes. And the characters, though shallow in their depth, are an enjoyable enough cast, and some quality followers are added here, with a few trainers to boot. Aside from the Companions, Whiterun is incredibly well laid out. I am certain that players visit this city most frequently of all, simply due to its immediate blacksmith shop at the entrance. The variety of shops in the marketplace help, and numerous quests are available simply by chatting with the citizens of the city. For these reasons, Whiterun is very homey. As the first city players encountered within the game, it became an iconic scene for gamers worldwide, and even has its own specific theme within the soundtrack, with a title referencing the city itself. As the introductory city, most players are most familiar with this one more than the others, and likely know the streets like the back of their hand. Most characters are pleasant enough to interact with the exception of Nazim, and citizens rarely throw anything too heavy at the player all at once. It's easy to pick up on miscellaneous tasks by chatting around, with the morally divided "who's the liar" debate from My Time of Need, fending off Mikhail from antagonized women, or exploring the secrets of the Rorikstead farm. Whiterun also has its own specific example of the whole Stormcloak Empire debate, this time being from the perspective of two clans, the Greymanes and the Battleborns. The Greymanes are seemingly easier to align yourself with, as Yorland is the smithy from the Companions, and Freya begs you to find her son who she claims is being held captive by the Battleborns. The Battleborns don't have much going for them, and even have a little turd of a kid who bullies other kids in the streets. Nonetheless, this serves as another catalyst for the player to get involved in the struggle and pick a side in the war. Atop the city itself lies Dragon's Reach, another location significant to Skyrim's lore. The keep is a climb up many stairs, and after ascending even more stairs, you find yourself peaked on a balcony high enough to reach, well, a dragon. Dragon's Reach as a keep is beyond gorgeous. The main hall is spacious and tall, with a large fire ever burning in the center of the court, the balcony overhead, and dark secrets lurking in the basement halls of the ancient keep. Just ask the Jarl's son about the Whispering Door. Although Dragon's Reach and Jorrvaskr are interesting, the player home of the city, Breezeholm, is small and forgettable. Aside from this, navigating the city from the falls up at Dragon's Reach down to the culverts by the stables is an absolute treat every time. The surrounding hold is an early player's dream, rife with wildlife, scenery, dungeons, dragons, and characters alike. If you're a seasoned player, Whiterun may have finally got a bit stale after 12 or so years, but is still the nostalgia-like dreamland that it was back in 2011. There is no telling how many times I changed my mind during the creation of this video of which city between the top 3 is truly the best, but while recording my footage for this video, it only reaffirmed my belief that Riften is the best city in Skyrim, and sports the most enjoyable hold. Compared to Solitude and Whiterun, Riften is completely fleshed out, with each and every one of its citizens having tales and desires of their very own. Helga is a devout follower of Dibella, almost to a fault, with references to her scandalous nature being found in her quarters and from men within the city. Sapphire at the Bee and Barb is seemingly cold at first, unapproachable, but the more the game develops and the more you explore even beyond Skyrim to Solstheim, you find more of her backstory, which makes her a both tragic and compelling character. Barkeep Kirava and her partner Talon Jay are adjusting to Skyrim, but are advocating at the local Temple of Mara to accommodate their Argonian traditions for their wedding. In addition to the characters being fleshed out, you can also use these traits or wants against them. In the introductory quest to the Thieves Guild, the player must collect debts from 3 individuals within the city, and by using information from your sources, you can coax the cash from each of them with relative ease. For example, Helga has a prized statue of her Lady Dibella, and if you snag it from her room and threaten to drop it in a well, she coughs up the money without question. The characters of Riften are also deeply involved in the politics of the landscape. Like Whiterun, Riften is a major city in Skyrim caught between the powers in Windhelm and Solitude. Only Riften's interest in the war is driven by its own major power, Maven Blackbriar. Maven is the local business tycoon, owner of the Blackbriar Meadery and matriarch of the Blackbriar family, who own the majority of Riften. From time to time, you may help Maven with the occasional business dealing, like help her son with alchemy, smuggle a keg to Iverstead, or maybe just put a competitor out of business. Maven has ties all across Skyrim, with connections to the Thalmor, Jarl of Riften, given she hasn't taken that job for herself, the Dark Brotherhood, and, most notably, the Thieves Guild. As a result of her influence, Riften is a city ran from the shadows, with the puppet master Maven pulling many strings that keep the city afloat. See, Riften, like Winterhold, had some recent complications in its history. Amidst the Void Nights, a period where some of the moons around Nirn vanished, Riften's previous Jarl was assassinated, and the tyrannical reign of Hoskin Crossdaggers began. With extreme taxes, strict curfews, and abrupt executions, Hoskin was eventually usurped by the people he tormented, and in the torching of his keep, the aptly named Hoskin's Folly, the fire spread to much of Riften, which after 5 years was reconstructed into the city that it is today. Though it's supposedly a shadow of its former self, Riften is a fantastic city, sitting aside Lake Hunric and the Dark River, with numerous fishing spots and a canal that houses many of the shops and homes of the city. The center of the city has many people to trade with, a blacksmith, a few other shops nested nearby, and a few beneath the upper docks. Just outside the city lies the fishery and the Blackbriar Meadery, and opposite this way is Mistvale Keep. In contrast to the other keeps, Mistvale was admittedly a bit of a letdown in its style, but Maven's string pulling here is quite evident, and the struggles of Imperial versus Stormcloak. Maven's power and influence with the Jarl and others at Mistvale Keep extends as far as using the city's dungeon as her own personal timeout zone for her kids. Riften also sports a brand new concept for the Elder Scrolls: children, and adoption from the city's very own orphanage. Seeing as it's the only orphanage within all of Elder Scrolls, this location is quite significant and makes Riften again another iconic and standout city. If you prove yourself likable enough, The abrasive city bouncer Maul will let you know that one of these orphans has escaped and is looking to contact the Dark Brotherhood in order to end the career of the cruel headmistress. Beneath the canals in the city, you can find another Riften oddity, the Ratway. In these sewer tunnels beneath the city, you can find the gloves of the pugilist if you want to lean hand to hand, and it's even home to the Thieves Guild itself. Though, like the city, the Thieves Guild is a shadow of its former self, and the player can aid its many intriguing characters to restore the Thieves Guild to its once infamous reputation in Skyrim. With the Thieves Guild as the city's primary joinable faction, the characters of Riften put Whiterun and the companion characters to shame, making them look incredibly surface level in comparison. Delvin Mallory has to be one of the most iconic and recognizable characters in the game, with his voice really standing out. He spends endless days dealing cash for jobs and drinking over Vex's heart. Vex herself is wise, smart, and sarcastic, constantly dodging Delvin's attempts to steal her heart. And the barkeep of the Ragged Flagon, Vekkel, is the man. There's plenty of other interesting characters like the mysteriously named Rune, and even an optional member that you can free from the Thalmor during the main quest. The Thieves Guild is also one of the most enjoyable questlines of the game, boasting variety in its gameplay, and giving the player more agency in their approach than any other faction. Like mentioned earlier, getting the debts from Aelga can be done without violence, instead by exploiting her devotion. Infiltrating Golden Glow can prove a bit taxing, but talk to the thieves in your network and you can get some insight that makes sneaking in much easier. The main driver for me for joining the faction is Tanelia, fencing extraordinaire. Tanelia buys almost anything, including your stolen goods, and spawns with 1,000 gold to trade at base. Given you have a decent speech ability, or even the Thieves Guild hood, most of the money you need within the game can be earned from Tanelia and the Thieves Guild alone. The story for the guild proves pretty interesting. I find the Heist of Oblivion much cooler, but compared to Skyrim's other questlines, Thieves Guild may take the cake for best faction. Speaking of interesting factions, the Rift is also home to the scenic Dayspring Canyon, which houses Fort Dawnguard. The fort is a marvel to behold, the faction is beyond fun, but we're here for the hold itself. The Dayspring Canyon is likely the most well-designed and scenic locations in the entire game, maybe in all of Elder Scrolls. Aside from the canyon, the Rift is in general wondrous to explore, and a beautiful sight to see, with the snowy Jarrell Mountains to the south, streams and rivers running off Lake Honrick, and the iconic birch forest of the Rift in a never-ending autumn, with golden leaves dancing their way from branch to ground. I could spend days gazing at the sights of the Rift, and if you're a fisher, you're in for a treat. There are fishing spots everywhere. While wandering the scenic woods, you're bound to bump into numerous locations, like the Redwater Den, home to some extra special skooma, or Froki's Shack, where you can pass the sacred trials of Kine. If the Dawnguard isn't enough for you, or the hold doesn't keep your attention, perhaps the secrets of the city will. As mentioned earlier, Riften's citizens are very well fleshed out, many picking sides on the war, and some having problems or addictions, and some on their own are having struggles just trying to get by. Talking to nearly all of its citizens will yield some sort of miscellaneous action or a quest for the player, in not your typical dungeon clear or fetch quest, but tends to use speech and persuasion as the driver to quest completion. For instance, Louis Latruche claims that he and Sibby Blackbriar have a deal for Latruche to have Sibby's horse, Frost, but Sibby's under lock and key by word of Maven. You can proceed with the deal, or you could approach Maven and claim that Latruche is trying to steal Sibby's horse. Even at your entry to the city, you're given a dilemma whether or not to trust the guard at the front gate on whether you truly have to pay a visitor's tax. A silver-tongued thief seems to do best in this scene, blackmailing the guard to let you in without paying what is obviously a fake tax. The Rift and Riften as a city truly make the best use of everything that Skyrim as a game has to offer. Speech mechanics for gaining trust and information, or bribery, intimidation, burglary and pickpocketing for yourself or for the guild, complete characters with a variety of quests and attributes, the most beautiful hold in Skyrim, and political instability with a power-wielding puppet master at the city's core. For what it gives, Riften is hands down the best city in the game. Thanks for watching this all the way to the end. You are likely older than a Draugr at this point, and given that we'll all be older than Paarthurnax by the time Elder Scrolls 6 is released, you can expect more content on Skyrim, Oblivion, and Morrowind among others, until we can sink our teeth into the next Elder Scrolls game. Until then, stay warm and happy, everybody.